I'm a big fan of drama in the Pokesphere. Tiering debates are obviously phenomenal, like the ones that this video are about. You know, you really see the best of people come out in that. I remember a DPP Baton Pass debate some years ago where the presence of Baton Pass in the metagame was compared to, I forget exactly what it was, but it was like the presence of malaria in some ecosystems to keep a certain part of the population in check. I don't remember. It was ridiculous. Yeah, and the crazy thing is that as absurd as the way I just remembered it sounds, the actual post doing it was somehow even more. Truth really is stranger than fiction. So yeah, I enjoy tiering debates, but I like all kinds of Poke drama. There's the tournament host making a controversial call where the side whose call it's in favor of are saying, well, it's clearly the correct choice, and the call whose side it goes against are arguing that the host is probably one of the worst people to have ever lived, that kind of stuff. And then there's, other really juicy stuff like, player 1 calls player 2 terrible, but player 1 has really not earned the right, let's say, to be a little pompous about it, to call anyone bad. I love that kind of stuff. And I especially enjoy it now that I'm not really personally involved. I can just watch it from a distance. Because let me tell you, when you have stake in this kind of stuff, it is life and death. You take it really seriously. So, but now for me, it's just, and for most people who are aware of it, who aren't, right there in it, then it's just light entertainment. A good way to unwind. It's like, oh man, I gotta take it easy. Let me check what's going on in the world of competitive Pokemon. It's like, oh wow, there's some controversy around so-and-so. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it doesn't really stick with you. The stuff that tends to stick with you is stuff that maybe is relevant to a tier you're playing, or a tier you enjoy following or whatever, and that is the case for this video. Or like cases of extreme cheating, where you're like, wow, this person really went really far to be accepted by the community, or to be seen as great, or whatever. What were they trying to prove to everyone else? What were they trying to prove to themselves? I think that stuff's interesting. Or, cases, in a darkly funny way, where someone just erupts and starts, going on these huge, rants, which, I can understand. This stuff can be infuriating, especially with the common habit of Pokemon players really enjoying riling each other up and being dishonest and saying nonsense. It's very difficult to not give them the reaction that they want sometimes. So, this case is one that I don't really have any personal investment in, but I do have some passing interest in it because I do think Gen 8 OU is an intriguing metagame. Wow, Kev, I didn't know you ever played Gen 8 OU. Yeah, on a couple occasions. The times I was most invested was right after the Crown Tundra came out, and I was playing it because of Smogon Tour, and I was actually pretty proud of that because I got into the Crown Tundra metagame pretty quickly, and it felt... I liked the way it felt. I mean, there was crazy stuff running around, like Spectrier. I think there was something... Pheromosa, yeah, that was pretty nuts. But Landorus Incarnate in those first days, of course. Zygarde. But yeah, what I liked about it was its balanced, rather meticulous, measured pace, which is something that we'll come back to throughout this video. And I was actually pretty proud about it because I made a team of my own, and it did pretty well. And some players liked the team so much that they asked me if I could give it to them so they could use it themselves. And I was like, hey, in Gen 8 OU, all right, that's pretty cool. I was happy because I could. I was like, oh, if I invest myself in it, then sure I can play it. It's not rocket science. It's still Pokemon. So that was a nice little affirmation to myself. Yeah, can you hear the need to prove myself to myself thing coming out of that? Isn't this stuff interesting? So we will go through this thread in more detail. Don't worry. And we also will go through this replay on the screen, this very menacing replay, but in good time. Yeah, so after that little period of me getting into Gen 8OU and understanding it, then, Smoking Toward Past, and I was like, all right, that's enough of that for me. I don't really have any desire to play serious Gen 8OU, and, over time, really play too seriously much anymore, period. With some exceptions. But, it's not just about my opinion on Gen 8OU, because if we were in the fall of 2020 and the Crown Tundra just came out, then yes, my opinion would be as valuable as anyone else's who was playing the metagame regularly and thinking about it constantly and that kind of thing, building teams, that kind of stuff. Nowadays, not so much. But that's what makes this video interesting, because I'm not just here to tell you the correct opinion on this debate that's going on. It's about more than that, because there are players who are, obviously we're going to look at what the players are saying, and I don't really have any, I do have a preference, obviously, but just remember, that's just my preference and not really anything that you should take too seriously. It's more the way I like to play the game as opposed to what's best for the metagame, that kind of. I mean, I think those things tend to intertwine if you've got a certain approach of playing the game, which emphasizes player skill and. But that's something else. We'll get to that. So the reason why I think this debate is so interesting in particular is how it applies to the way we look at competitive Pokemon as a whole, and. This is why these cases are so interesting, because things are not always just about what they're about, right? So, ostensibly this video is about Gen 8OU and, boots and what do we do? This tier takes a million years to go anywhere, and it's kind of boring, and I don't like watching it. Should we fix it? That kind of stuff, right? But it's more about the way what we want in a metagame to begin with. And I actually thought of this when I was shaving this morning, because I cut myself a little. It wasn't like a deep gash or anything, but I did cut myself a little bit. And the reason I cut myself was not, God deciding to punish me or, bad luck or anything like that, or just like a slip of the mind. No, it was the fact that I was careless and rushing, and that had a number of things behind it. I am not a full beard kind of guy. Whenever I have a beard, it's out of laziness and not out of I want to have a beard. It's I'm more of a 1 to 3 days of stubble kind of guy. So, but I don't like shaving. That's the thing. It really annoys me, and thus I tend to not shave as regularly as I really should. But then when I do shave, then the whole experience is so much more obnoxious, and that just gets me really annoyed. And then I tend to, mess up a little bit. And of course, part of it is me being annoyed with myself that I let it come to this point. And so you see where it's more... Well, just how that whole Gen 8OU thing was, I proved myself to myself. This whole thing is, Kev, you gotta stop being so lazy. You gotta shave more often. It's not that big a deal. The reason you don't shave that often is because you make mountains out of molehills. A phenomenal talent of mine. Well, any Pokemon players really, but and then it gets to points like these, and now it's a little annoying, right? So. Yeah, in a similar vein, or you can extend it to art, of course. Like, on the surface, the Brothers Karamazov is about, a really, really bad father and his tenuous relationship with his 3 sons and what they go on to do with him. But it's also about a lot more than just that, right? That's kind of how life tends to work. So, in that vein, we are first going... Now, this is not to say that that book is not about, the relationship between, a bad father and his sons, because it very much is, of course. And this video is in very much about the Gen 8.0U boots thing, but it's also about what we look for in competitive Pokemon. I know I've said that before, but I just wanted to clarify that yes, the specifics of Gen 8.0U and boots and long games or whatever, those are important, but those are almost secondary. I wouldn't say they're completely incidental, but they could be. Because you could very easily replace it with, oh, well, Gen 2.0U takes forever. Oh, well, why is that a bad thing? Stuff like that. And I've had these debates a lot. But, let's go to Gen 8.0U. So, let me preface this by saying, preface this even more. How many 10 minutes in. By saying, I like Gen 8.0U. This is not a video trying to slander it or anything like that. I don't really believe in being libelous against metagames. I want to make this video called Ranking Every Metagame of OU, but I'm ranking them by the dynamics they have and by personal preference in playing out those dynamics. But I mean, the differences between them are so minimal that it almost doesn't matter. And really just a fun little exercise. Well, I like the dynamics of Oris a little more than Gen 7.0U, but I like Gen 7.0U too, so stuff like that. So I do like Gen 8.0U, even though I have, my preferences. But yeah, this is not a way to say, oh, Gen 8 sucks or anything like that. Because I think those ideas that I don't like it, therefore the metagame is uncompetitive, I think those arguments are really bad. I think it's, oh, well, you have to use this and that. It's like, okay, you can make any tier sound terrible. It's very, very easy. Show me the most balanced metagame ever, and I could make it sound like, hell on earth in about 2 seconds. All right, so I think that stuff is really disingenuous. Fact of the matter is, most metagames, once they get out of that state where they have a gajillion broken things running around, and even those that still have, some questionable elements to them, they tend to settle decently, right? You can make skillful use of anything in the game, even broken stuff. That doesn't mean that stuff that still has metagames that still have broken stuff in them can't generally be balanced. The better player tends to win. The thing you look for to remove in metagames is stuff that's too easy to win with. Stuff that really spoon feeds the correct answer to the player automatically. Kind of how, to draw a lofty example, Baton Pass. With Baton Pass, you pretty much always have the right move laid out in front of you. There's very little mystery to it. And it's so strong, and it makes it so easy for players to lose even when the other player didn't do anything to really earn that win. Not to get into the nitty-gritty of, oh, well, earned or deserved wins, that's a tough concept. I know what you mean. But the simplest version of this is, of course, you lead off with Mega Rayquaza and outspeed an OHKO a team of UUs, right? Like, was that really... that was not quite as skillful as beating a team of UUs with another team of UUs. So, that's generally what you look for in metagames. And, well, rather than get to my opinion on this... No, I will throw in this first thing. This thread is about banning boots, and I personally don't like boots. And this is really just my preference as a player. I don't think that they ruin the metagame or anything. Because like I said, I like watching Gen 8.0U. I just think that boots kind of undo an aspect of Pokemon that I think is really valuable, which is keeping really good Pokemon in check. Because the Pokemon, in something like, RBY or even GSC, then the Pokemon are not as strong, or the Pokemon are bulkier, same difference. So if they get free switch-ins over and over, then it's not truly going to be as catastrophic as, modern generations, where the Pokemon are so powerful that you need to limit their switches as much as possible. Even in seemingly small increments. Like for example, I remember in I forget which video it was, like the power of passive damage or something. You don't really think of Tapu Lele as a Stealth Rock weak Pokemon, because it's not, obviously. But I remember one tournament replay in particular, which is in that video, which shows that Tapu Lele, every time it comes in, it's going to threaten, it's going to get a KO or very close to it, right? And it is going to come in over and over again because of the power of switch moves, and switch moves vis-a-vis boots. Oh, the Vortex, as it was called. What a nightmare. But when Specs Lele is coming over and over, then one of your few saving graces is that you are not going to be pressured. You are at least taking a little bit of health from it just for switching in. 12.5, right? And if you can't get up those rocks, you don't think, oh, I'm going to get rocks for that Tapu Lele, but you do kind of need it, because otherwise it's going to blast you so much more easily. You know, enough rock switches and suddenly Tapu Lele can be revenge killed by Tornadus Therian, which wouldn't come close to KOing it without those rocks. So that's the general dynamic of, and I think there's a lot of examples of Pokemon that don't just blast through opposing teams, but blast through opposing teams too easily regarding their hazard weakness. Like, I remember when Keldeo was being really controversial in Oris, then one of the problems was that it's Stealth Rock resistant, so you really can't wear it down over the course of a game like you would something like Tapu Lele. You know, or Mega Metagross is another great example. So, yeah, that's the general idea. I just prefer when you are able to keep offensive stuff in check. You know, and the offensive threats in Gen 8 are really, really nuts. But when you are able to do so passively, because you're not always going to be able to tango with them directly, especially in a metagame where switch moves are absolutely everywhere and are so riskless and easy to use, then you are going to give those switches to these terrifying Pokemon like Weavile and Dragapult. And dealing with them repeatedly, now that is a really brutal concept, especially with Weavile's knockoff, you know, removing boots of your own. That's pleasant. Yeah. The lack of Megas and Z Crystals factors into knockoff's insane spammability, of course. And the lack of, you know, gimmick leads into the whole thing about how Gen 8 doesn't have a gimmick of its own, and that makes it slow-paced. But we'll get to that. Yeah, so I like when things can be worn down passively, because dealing with them directly is very, very difficult, borderline unreasonable at times. And people would also extend this to defensive Pokemon. You know, we think of offensive Pokemon mostly because those are, you know, the first things that get banned, right? The things that outspeed and just blast through everything, right? But defensive Pokemon, you know, especially in the age of Regenerator, an oft-maligned ability among many, many players, then, you know, I can empathize with that. You know, I think it's important for teams to have good defensive counterplay to offensive threats, but I also get that Regenerator makes it a little too easy. You know, I get the whole thing where it's just, well, no matter what, you have all these safe switches, and you just do it over and over and over again, and that kind of lays the game out for you, and makes it difficult to bust through. So I am not unsympathetic to that view. And again, that really becomes exacerbated with boots. I think it's telling that nobody complains about Regenerator in Gen 5 at all. If anything, Regenerator is like one of the few ways that you can not get completely bowled over by the, you know, slew of threats coming at you from every direction. So, and Gen 6, I think it's also very rare to really find genuine Regenerator complaints, because the Regenerators are good, but there's not that much in terms of defog. Yeah, actually, no, I take it back. The defoggers are just bad, famously so. And so, again, hazards keep them in check. And then in Gen 7, the complaints start getting, you know, more and more pronounced. That's mostly a Toxapex thing, though. And the other Regenerators, nobody really minds that much. And still, you can pressure them with hazards, even with Ultra Sun and Moon's defog boom, you know. So it's mostly just a Pex thing. Now, Gen 8, you know, Regenerator and Boots, that's kind of a nasty combination. And, I don't think PEX runs Boots too off. I know it has run Boots before, for sure, but I don't know if it's go-to. But, I mean, it doesn't need to, because it's so ridiculous either way. But, yeah, I understand that. So, the general thing being... The general sentiment about Gen 8 OU that everyone says... that was poorly phrased, I apologize. That everyone complains about whenever there's a tournament game is, oh my god, this is so boring. Oh my god, this is taking forever. Oh my god, where is this going? The whole thing. Everyone likes Gen 9 OU because it's got Terra and it's offensively explosive. And it's like, oh, well, this is what happens when you have a generational mechanic that putting aside Terra controversy, because I know that's there. Yeah, so you've got the whole Gen 8 OU is boring because, and this replay will, I just want to get through the thread first before we go through this replay, and which is, I think, a perfect example. Just looking at that team preview, we've got, I know the dimensions are off for those watching and not listening. We got one regen on TDNT, no, two regen on TDNT's team, Slowbro and Torn. I don't know if that Clef has a wish or not, but, Dragapult might be Boots. Garchomp tends to run lefties. Clef might be Wish. Melmetal loves lefties protect. And then on the other side, we've got Tornadus again and Galarian Slowbro. And, Gastrodon with Recovery, Corviknight, and probably a Boots Weavile. So I can see why this game goes so long. So I will not read this entire thread out loud because I think that is... I don't like those YouTube videos which are basically just reading what amounts to a Wikipedia article for people who don't want to read it. I'm just going to sum up the points, and if you would like the details, then the thread is linked in the pinned comment. So this is coming from Krang or Ben Gay, one of the most decorated tour players of more modern generations, even though he's been away for a while. But yeah, nobody complains about Gen 8 OU from a competitive standpoint, and that's why I think this whole thing is so interesting. They just complain that it's boring to spectate. Now, I personally, I think as soon as you introduce boring into the equation, then that's when you lose me, personally. Because, yes, the game of Pokemon is supposed to be fun, but it's also subjective. You can't necessarily just go by, oh, it's not fun, because that's, well, by that metric, we should ban Skarmory in Gen 3 OU because that's not fun to face. But then some people say, oh, well, I think Skarmory is fun in Gen 3 OU. I enjoy the dynamic of playing with it, playing around it, making sure, whatever, right? So that's why that kind of fun thing is a lot less measurable than something like competitiveness. Like, oh, this warps games around it to an unhealthy degree, that kind of stuff. I mean, obviously that stuff is very much debatable, but fun is just too subjective. So, yeah, so, and that's why I think this is so interesting, in that I can't really remember a metagame since, I don't know, Gen 5 at some of its worst. Actually, Gen 5, for all its flaws, and there were a million, it was never really boring. Well, I mean, I personally would think that it gets kind of boring to, deal with it, all those problems over and over again, but the offensive power level was so huge that you were never really bored. I mean, annoyed, for sure, but bored, not really. So here in Gen 8 OU, that's why this whole thing is so intriguing. We have this metagame that is almost perfectly balanced, it seems. I know there was some controversy about Melmetal, but I think that kind of stuff has died out. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But we have a perfectly balanced metagame that no one, or when I say no one, I'm exaggerating. There are some people who really enjoy it. And I really enjoy spectating it. I think I would enjoy playing it if I did. It's got a bunch of dynamics that I appreciate, which I'll elucidate on. But we've got this perfectly balanced metagame that nobody really wants to play, nobody really wants to spectate, and I can only, I don't know, I really, okay, I can understand it, because I know that as much as most players tend to say, oh, well, I want a competitive metagame, what they really mean is I want a metagame that's competitive enough while it still satisfies my dopamine clicking buttons. You know, this is why when people complain about a lack of a generational mechanic or a generational gimmick in Gen 8, you know, or whenever they say, oh no, we can't ban X in Gen Y because it's the generation's defining mechanic or feature. I'm like, who cares about that? What about the metagame? Like, I don't really have a strong opinion on Z moves in Gen 7 anymore, but there was a serious case for banning them because they were, you know, doing all sorts of insane things and pushing so many things over the edge. And people were genuinely saying, no, it's the generational, it's the defining generational feature. It's like, this is not competitively minded. And funnily enough, like literally like 2 to 3 weeks after that debate, Gen 8 came out and Dynamax was banned. So I thought that was really special. But so I really have very little sympathy for the generational mechanic thing, because I think that's a subjective fun. To me, it basically just says, yeah, no, I want my flashy big buttons. You know, I want my Gen 5 weather. People were thinking about banning megas in Gen 6, but you know, compared to a lot of stuff we get now, and I think they are balanced. I think they have a good dynamic. That was never really a widespread sentiment in Gen 6. I mean, obviously it pops up like, oh, should we ban all these? But you know, so. We've got there's also the fact that Gen 8 changes the game a lot, because not just, this is a good point that I forgot earlier, that Ben makes, which is that there's no more pursuit. And that, I gotta say, that is definitely one of my least favorite things about Gen 8. Maybe my least favorite, because I think pursuit was also an excellent way of keeping things in check and forcing progress. And I think it's really, I mean, whenever I see Dragapult running circles around things, I was just like, not in T-Tar's heyday. Like, the idea of Spec Shadow Ball being a spammable move and not just like a noob trap that you see on low ladder before, yeah. So, and then there's like other things that I don't love, but I can live with, like, what is it? Oh, Steel not resisting Dark anymore. But that's, again, preference things. And overall, I think you take the metagame for what it is, right? If this is going to be a metagame with boots and, you know, no pursuit and all that kind of stuff, then you just take it for what it is. Not every metagame is going to be like the previous one, right? You know, and trying to make it more like it just for the sake of it is a bad idea. Now, on the other hand, you don't want to keep stupid stuff around just because it's new. You know, like, your idea of balance can be rooted in previous metagames, but it also can just be rooted in, hey, this is not good for the game. And I think that's where Boot stands personally, without, you know, really feeling too strongly about it, because I'll enjoy watching Gen 8 OU either way. So, yeah, the general complaint about Boots is that it makes making progress an extended war of attrition that is really undesirable. And to Ben's credit, he's not just saying it's not fun, he's saying that it's a matter of competitiveness, which is an argument I am much more sympathetic to, because I gotta say, personally, I really like that whole Gen 8 thing, where games are really long and really drawn out, and you really have to execute a plan for an extended period of time, and you really have to execute at a high level. I think that kind of demand it makes on the players is a good thing. I think it's, just for the same reasons I like GSC. I think it's really good that a player should have to, because when games get really short, I think that's when games really start getting dumb. You know, when it's just bam, 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 big sweeper, because there's, it's not about there not being much room for error, because that is another interesting gray area about this whole thing. It's about how there's just not much reasonable response at all. On the other hand, The room for error thing, I think, applies to this whole Gen 8 deal because the argument is that boots and regenerator means there's too much room for error, and it's less about executing well over a longer period of time and more about, just unnecessarily dragging games out. So, the answer is probably somewhere in between. But generally, I do not mind that games are regularly very long, and that they, because I think it's a good dynamic to have. I'll stop myself from repeating myself too much more. So, yeah, I think, but I do agree that, when, like Ben says here, hazard management places more of this kind of demand. Because I think if Gen 7 is anything to look at, and even Gen 6, then games would regularly still be drawn out. Those games do not necessarily end in 2 seconds, but they also have a good sense of progress going for them. Whereas. Sorry, I'm trying to say 16 things at once as usual. Yeah, they place a higher demand on you executing because you will be punished more, but they still have that good balance of having the game progress over a healthy number of turns. So, I think that's a good dynamic, and a dynamic that should be encouraged. Yeah, I don't know about what he says about resuspecting Cinderace, Magearna, and Kyurem. That sounds, especially Magearna, that one's kind of nuts. But hey, I mean, I'll enjoy watching it either way. Yeah. Oh, that was the other thing. That now with the complete dearth of players interested in playing and watching Gen 8 OU, then you are able to. This would be a good time to test it, because you're not really upending the metagame. You're not really upending the metagame on the player base, or rather on much of a player base at all. So, ABR isn't a fan of a boots test. Finch is not. Boots clause, who knows, or item clause, who knows, but that's probably never going to happen. But yeah, TPP saying Magearna and Cinderace, hey, you can't really, no thanks. Yeah, but then he also makes the good counter argument that Oris, people felt similarly about Oris for some time, and then that naturally changed. But I also am wary of this kind of thinking because it's also a very easy way of saying, well, let's see what happens. That has historically, not saying that's what TPP is doing here, TPP is a great guy, but historically it has been a way of saying, hey, shut up and deal with your terrible metagame because we don't want to do anything. Because, we're in power and we like being in power and we don't even care about the issue at hand, but we don't want to give you what you want because we want to exert power over you. So, I don't think that's the case here at all. It's just a line of thinking that I really don't care for, because that whole thing about, just see what happens. Like, okay, for how long? It just goes on indefinitely, and then the debate comes up again. It's like, well, let's see what happens. People have said this stuff about Baton Pass. Well, let's see if people adapt to Baton Pass. It's like, come on. If there's enough evidence, then something should, and if also there's enough evidence that people just aren't using the tools they have, then that's a good argument. But if there is evidence that there's a problem and that something should be done, then it should be looked into, as opposed to the just blanket, hey, don't do anything. But yeah, giving SSOU time to establish a community. Well, there is no community. The problem is that there is a limited community because everyone thinks it's boring. And, what that is, kind of already went over that. Or why that is, rather. Yeah, so I'm trying to not repeat myself as much. Yeah, big upheaval. Yes, it was. It would change pretty much everything. I think that's good. I mean, it would be tougher to take things on defensively, but the offensive threats are limited as well. So then people say, look, the metagame is balanced. Static and Flame Body are too much. Those are silly. That's interesting. Then Star says, I don't get the logic behind going after boots. It's not the one thing that makes Gen 8 games long. Yeah, okay, I mean, those are, that's fair. That doesn't mean that boots can't be silly, but... oh, there's also Future... Oh, God, Future Sight is so good. I'm thinking of it more in Gen 6, where I think it needs to be used a lot more. Yeah. There is going to be a new tournament with it. The Smogon Masters Tour with Gen 6, 7, and 8. But... So, maybe people will be more motivated to try it out and see, oh, actually this metagame is pretty good. That stuff tends to happen as well. So see, it could go either way, which I am sympathetic to. Yeah. Alright, so here's Herb saying, no, I don't think this is a good idea. Here's Ox saying, I would support a boot suspect at this time. It's not going to, But yeah, here's the... It's too boring to watch, and something needs to happen. Which, and again, that makes the whole... That's the whole debate, where, I personally don't mind. I don't think it's boring to watch at all. I like that kind of drawn-out dynamic, but... At the end of the day, it also does come down to, what does the player base want? Because that in these policy review debates, you always have people coming in and saying, I don't play this tier, but... And it winds up clogging the thread and derailing it as people wind up responding to this person who doesn't know what they're talking about, but they just love arguing policy, like it's, debate club or something. And that winds up getting in the way of the whole thing. Like, how many times, like, oh, well, we would like to suspect XYZ thing in Gen 4 OU, like Sandvale. It's like, well, I don't play Gen 4, but, 80% isn't that bad for Ice Beam, so, just use it multiple times. And if you lose, you lose. Coming from a person who has never had an important DPP game that they might have lost because they missed 3 HP Ices on a 10% Gliscor. So, oh yeah, here's the really crazy stuff. The whole unban Gigantamax, or Gigantamax, because Dynamax is too much, because it's on everything, but Gigantamax is on specific Pokemon. That sounds a little crazy, but Finch says that's not going to happen. Yeah, perfectly balanced. Yes, the Hansuki sentiment here, it's perfectly balanced. You might try to change it because it's boring, but it's a competitive tier. Then I think that's fine. That's something I agree with. Sorry, I was reading and trying to say something at the same time. I do like... I do think that boots would help with things, though. Or removing boots. But hey, I'm... Regenerator, see, I don't know, man. I really don't like the idea that Regenerator is broken or evil or anything, because again, look at those previous generations where it's either in Gen 7 you have Toxapex, which is Toxapex, or it's stuff that you can pressure with hazards more reliably. So I'm really not so sympathetic to Regenerator being busted. And Hansuki here says, switching was a basic mechanic and really important for playing Pokemon, which always had drawbacks, so you had to be careful when switching. Yes, I agree, but on the other hand, switching has become more and more difficult over the years because of hazards, and because switching into things gets harder and harder with how everything gets stronger. So I think Regenerator is actually a very good thing, conceptually at least, in order to balance things out. And I think that the massive hatred towards Regenerator just comes from people really, really hating, slow play or defensive play. Not because it's uncompetitive, but again, because it's boring, because, want to click the buttons and see things die. So... Yeah, let's see here. OU version of it boring. Yeah. So yeah, now it's more or less the same. What I thought was interesting was the last post in this thread, as I remember. Here's Will of Fire. Boots doing more harm. Saying they don't open up team building, or rather they just make certain things that are already good too good, which I can definitely appreciate that kind of thing. Or, you know, I remember early in the Crown Tundra, people genuinely wanted to ban Future Sight, because Future Sight and things like Urshifu was just absolutely ridiculous. And, I mean, on one hand, yeah. Especially with that Steel no longer resisting dark thing. Not that it would really help too much against Urshifu, but just makes everything a little more extreme. But Will of Fire does make a good point that when Slowbro has boots, or Galarian Slowking, for example, then it is able to spam Future Sight way more easily when it's coming in so unscathed, especially alongside Regenerator. So, yeah. And here's another post advocating for the removal of Static and Flame Body, which I, am definitely not unsympathetic to, because that kind of stuff can be exasperating. And I think Gen 8 definitely seems to be where the impact is greatest. Maybe in response to Boots' U-turn being nuts and Knockoff being everywhere. It's like, alright, well, you want to knock off? Well, enjoy your burned Weavile. Here's an SSOU player who, Dex, who I don't know, but that's more on me, because I don't really follow the Gen 8 OU player base other than the players who I already knew. Dragapult never being tested. That one seems kind of, I understand. Tapu Lele, that one, I'm not sure, but, because you don't, I guess I personally don't think of Tapu Lele as being particularly insane in Gen 8, because Psychic Surge, or Psychic Terrain powers up its Psychic moves by 1.3 and not 1.5. But he makes a good point that there's no Megas around, so it's a lot stronger by comparison. And no Pursuit. Actually, that makes it particularly vicious. Don't test Weavile, okay. And don't test Boots. So, yeah, see, this is why it's such a interesting debate. Well, one of many reasons. You know, whenever someone says, oh, the reason why this is so-and-so, it's like, no, it's generally one of many reasons. So you can't just boil it down to one. But yeah, Boots, some players think, oh no, Boots makes things worse. Oh, Boots makes things better. And yeah, here Ben responds. He understands these posts, don't think they're obviously broken enough to warrant a ban, but an unhealthy aspect of the metagame that should be at least examined. The main abusers have been mentioned. They take advantage of it to an unhealthy extent. The Cinderace point is particularly interesting because there is... Kyurem was banned even when it didn't use boot sets, to my recollection. It had a lot of stuff it can do. But Cinderace is very, very difficult to imagine as being broken without boots. Well, or Libero, obviously, but... yeah, Boots makes it very difficult to punish for one of the most important, or one of the best ways to punish things that are otherwise going to just dart in and out of battle and ruin you repeatedly. Cinderace being the, the perfect example of that. Yeah. Yeah, the thing mentioned about how it's not just going to necessarily change. I think, I personally, I'm also pretty liberal about testing things, because if the end result winds up being worse, you just undo it. And it's not like the metagame is going, it's not like you're suggesting dropping something horrifying into OU, like, Zacian or something. You are not going to completely upend the metagame. It's going to, if it's a reasonable ban or unban, then you're still going to have a competitive metagame, and at the end of the day, people are going to complain about it either way, so it's better to test it and see if it really is better. You know, there's always this demand in tiering, like, oh, well, we need proof that this would be better with or without such and such elements. Like, there's not proof. That's why you have to try it. And I'm very open to trying these things, because I don't think it costs much. I don't think it changes much at all. You know, so... yeah. Oh, the contact abilities are nastier now that that boots are around, for sure. In the case of Zapdos and Volcarona, does Moltres still get used? I've seen Moltres used recently. Actually, I've seen Galarian Moltres used recently. That one's interesting. Balance. So here's why I sympathize with this. It's not to make the tier more fun or develop interest, but to make it more competitive and skill-based. And just because the tier is fine as is, or competitive as is, does not mean that it cannot be improved. And that's really important. As opposed to, I can't bear watching this is too slow and boring and long. As opposed to, no, we can make this metagame better, here's how. That is a good way of looking at things. You know, to draw a parallel to, let's say, the Latias unban in DPP, there was a lot of evidence for how it would specifically improve the metagame, and it has improved the metagame in that sense. But even if it didn't, it's like, alright, well, 6 months later, 1 year later, this thing's ruined everything, let's kick it back out. So, but that kind of sentiment is not widespread, because Latias is pretty balanced. So, it makes a good call about the path of least resistance, and that is how Smogon approaches its tiering, and that is how you get a lot of wild stuff. That's why past generations get tiered so much. It's like you think, well, why is it still being tiered? It's a past generation. You know, just play it and leave it be. It's like, well, first of all, if it's being played, then stuff is going to pop up. And second of all, that whole approach where you just kind of let things exist and don't really test much with it, then, you know, that's why you wind up saying, oh, this insane thing is still in the tier. So... and being more proactive, I think, is a good thing for reasons already outlined. Especially because the thing Ben mentions about, you know, you deal with it now or years down the line is still going to be the case. You know what? This is a really interesting parallel to Gen 5, where I remember years and years and years ago people said, oh, well, the drastic shakeup of Gen 5 OU, if you banned Weather or Latios or Keldeo or whatever, that would be really drastic. It would take years to settle. It's like, okay, well, now it's now years later, and the problems are still there. If we had bitten the bullet back then, you see where that goes. So, yeah, he makes a good response to Hansuki's post, and he specifies stuff about the Boots poke. The potentially effective Pokemon viability impacted if Boots were added. So, Dragonite becomes borderline unviable, sure, but generally looks like it's positive impact. Oh, Moltres stopped being used because it's not checking Cinderace or Magearna. Okay. Yeah. And then there's this video, I forget who, I think it's a Freeze Eye video, where VGC versus Smogon, where VGC is over in like 5 turns, and Smogon is just, or Gen 8 OU anyway, is just switching around. Again, I really don't like that kind of thought, but if you care about, you know, what people think at large about the tier, then, you know, because a lot of those opinions on whether it's boring or not, those are, not only are they, you know, very not competitively minded, to say the least, but they also tend to be very ignorant. You know, it's like, you know how many times I've seen people complain about Gen 4 with some complaint that is so demonstrably untrue, or Gen 3, or Gen 2 in particular, or Gen 1, it's like, oh, well, the funny thing about Gen 1, and again, when I do that ranking every metagame video, I will harp on this point in particular, but people say, oh, well, it's a fact that Gen 1 is decided more by luck than other generations, when it is provable, demonstrable at the very least, that is at the very least not the case, and if anything, it's actually less impacted by luck. Yeah, that's that's not going to stop people from thinking the worst of RBY, whether or not it's true. So, yeah, okay, and this is the last post in this thread, I believe, and I'm not going to... Oh, no, it's not. Oh, he also had the last post in this thread. But this is Pulsar512B, and he is a Gen 8 OU player. And he does not believe boots should be... that boots should not be touched, and that the metagame is very, very balanced. They're not broken, they do not make the game less skillful. Well, I don't know that I agree that this is as much of a fact as he states it is, because there definitely are cases to be made that they do make the game less skillful. Just in the same way that, you know, anything might. But, yeah, and I think actually there might even be some precedent in this. Like what people used to say, oh, well, Mega Sableye is not broken because hazards are not, in Gen 6, hazards are not, you know, a right or an inherent need. And then it was kind of revealed that, yeah, they kind of are, because look what happens when they don't. You know, talk about regenerator stall. You know, when you can't get hazards in Gen 6, that's why Mega Sableye was axed. And anyone who says, oh, well, it would be fine without Dugtrio, absolutely not. Mega Sableye was just not a good presence in the tier, because not just because it bounced back hazards, but other indirect means of damage as well. But, yeah, that's... yeah, so I would cite that as an example. Although, again, Pulsar clearly plays Gen 8 OU a lot more than me, so grain of salt. I think it's the real Gen 8 players who should be having this debate. This is just me weighing in and offering a viewpoint. Yeah, so in Ben's original post, he does say, if most people don't mind spending on average 100 plus turns per game, then I suppose I'm the crazy one. That part I don't actually agree with in his original post, because I personally don't think that that's a problem. And yeah, Pulsar makes the point, it's not an inherently bad thing. Long, patient, good games are arguably better than short, offense-filled games. Something I agree with personally as well. I just think that you would still have these long games in Gen 8 OU without boots, but you would have more of a healthy dynamic without the boots. Yeah. What should be done? Ban Quick Claw and Quick Draw or Dragapult. Well, there's another Dragapult post. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So to finish off this video, then let me just give this example replay played at hyper fast speed. It's like 220 turns or something, and it is a perfect example of the dynamics at play that were just being discussed. So if you are unfamiliar with SSOU, if you're not watching, if you're just listening to me in your car or wherever, then don't worry. This is well, I'll summarize it when I get back, because I am going to go to the bathroom. But for those who are watching, I muted the microphone too early. For those who are watching, you are now about to get an example of what happens in the type of Gen 8 OU game that people are complaining about. Alright, I went to the bathroom, put some sunscreen on, checked if I missed any spots while shaving, and we are on turn 88. So the dynamics in this game, as far as I can see, are Tornadus, even with its boots knocked off, knocking off as well. The other Torn, Swapa's Torn, still has its boots. Oh, nope, there they went. It just got knocked off by the other Torn. U-turn spam. So lots of regenerating. Slowbro's been Slowbro has future sighted 3 times and teleported 5 times. God, teleport. I mentioned the vortex earlier, and that's the one thing I really don't like about boots. And that switch moves are already kind of a potentially obnoxious area, but boots enabling switch moves, I think, is a kind of gameplay that is very, very. I mean, and then you have the whole punishing them with contact moves dynamic. But I mean, if the switch moves are Volt Switch from Tapu Koko or Teleport from the Slow Twins, then that's not really, punishable because you can't even pursuit the Slow Twins. So that kind of dynamic is something I don't care. That I think would be one of the better parts of boots. Because I remember in this is a 2021 memory, but it looks like it still applies with Torns and Slowbros and Dragapults being on display in this video or in this battle. But and Corviknight's U-turn, I forgot to mention that. Then yeah, they're just switching around. Regenerator, recovering off a Dragapult Specs Draco. Just waiting. There's Aromatherapy to shrug off status. Melmetal coming in, guarding against knockoff. Oh, no, it EQ. Oh, interesting dynamics. Wow, that got knocked off. That would be devastating. Does that Clef have... No, it doesn't have Wish. It has T-Wave, Aromatherapy, Soft-Boiled, Moonblast. But yeah, in 2021, I remember everyone was complaining about the Vortex because it was just... That was partially Cinderace's fault, but even after, it was just, U-turn after U-turn after Volt Switch after Teleport, and they've all got boots, and you just can't stop it, and they would just be chaining these switch moves together forever and ever. I mean, Volt Turn can be obnoxious in the most hazard-littered tiers, but, yeah. That's, without hazards there to mess with them as much, then that can be dicey. Although, where are actually, you know what? I don't think Swapa's team... Yeah, Swapa's team does not have Stealth Rock. And that's another dynamic. Like, prior to Gen 8, well, there goes Rocks on TDNT's team, but he's got Pressure Corviknight, so he's trying to stall it with Protect... To stall the Defogs with Protect to try and match the... Because Pressure Defog means that you do actually outstall Stealth Rock PP. Whereas with... and TDNT does not have his own Pressure Poke to Pressure Stall the Defogs in return. That was a dynamic that was present for a time when Zapdos got popular in Gen 6. Yeah, what was I thinking? Something... Oh, yeah. Swapa's team doesn't have Rocks because, and this is something you've seen more and more, it's like, well, if everything's going to run boots anyway, why even bother running Rocks? And now he's got, this game where that Dragapult is Specs at least. So, but yeah, dealing with Specs Dragapult without Rocks, that's nasty, so. But then it's also frustrating, oh, there's 2 Specs Shadow Balls from Blacephalon, plowing through Clef, and now Torn, and now back into Slowbro, and... this game's been going on for a while. It's on hyper fast speed. Goodness. Yeah, but then you do run Rocks. It's like, well, what am I doing? Everything's running boots anyway. And then you don't run Rocks, and you get run over by something like Specs Dragapult or the occasional banned Weavile even. And you're just like, this is just nasty either way. But yeah, this game ends in the 220s, I think. Yeah, look at that U-turn spam. My God. Personally, I still think that this kind of... I don't mind this kind of game at all, personally. Just to be 100% clear on it again. I just... it's the boots aspect. Well, it's TDNT's team, not really. And he couldn't get up Rocks against Swapas either. But these are the kind of dynamics at play in the tier. So this video is an hour long now. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. I hope the Gen 8 OU player base understands this video was done out of respectful interest And either way, I'll still like watching Gen 8 OU. So I am interested to see if anything happens. And if not, if so, great. If not, great. Thank you for watching / listening. Probably listening because I know this was not a very visual video until the last couple of minutes. And I will see you in the next one.